The red dust of New Terra swirled around David Mill's boots as he walked his patrol route for the 100th time that month. 3 moons hung in the purple sky above the human colony, casting strange shadows across the prefab buildings and mining equipment. David adjusted his rifle strap and wiped sweat from his forehead. The air recyclers worked fine, but they could never quite get rid of the metallic taste that came with breathing on an alien world. Something glittered near the fence line ahead. David squinted through the dust cloud and saw a small shape sitting perfectly still about 20 meters from the colony's edge. At first he thought it might be a piece of equipment that had blown over in the wind. New Terra had fierce storms that could pick up anything not bolted down. But as he got closer, the shape moved slightly. David stopped walking and brought up his binoculars. What he saw made him blink hard and look again. A creature about the size of a large cat sat in the dirt, watching him with bright amber eyes. Its body was covered in scales that shifted between blue and green in the sunlight. Small wings were folded against its back, and a long tail curled around its feet like a house pet trying to stay warm. The creature looked like something from the old stories his grandmother used to tell him. Like a dragon, but smaller, much smaller, and it was staring right at him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. David reached for his radio. "Base, this is Patrol 7. I've got an unknown life form at Sector 12. About 50 yards from the perimeter fence." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Patrol 7. Can you describe the contact?" David studied the creature again. It hadn't moved except to blink. "It's small, maybe 20 pounds. Looks like, well, it looks like a dragon. But that's impossible, right? Stand by, Patrol 7. While David waited for orders, he noticed something odd. The creature wasn't just sitting there randomly. It was positioned so it could see both him and the colony behind him, like it was watching, waiting for something. "Patrol 7, this is command. Dr. Webb wants you to maintain distance and observe. Do not approach the contact. Backup is on the way." David clicked his radio twice to acknowledge and settled in to wait. The creature seemed content to do the same. It sat as still as a statue, only its eyes moving to track David's small movements. 20 minutes later, Dr. Patricia Webb arrived with a full research team and 3 more soldiers. She was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she carried more scanning equipment than David had ever seen in one place. "Where did it come from?" she asked David while setting up her instruments. "No idea, Doc. It was just there when I made my rounds. Been sitting in the exact same spot for at least half an hour." Dr. Webb pointed a scanner at the creature and frowned at the readings. "This is remarkable. The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. The creature appears to be generating some kind of bioelectric field." The creature tilted its head at the sound of the scanner, but otherwise didn't react. "Is it dangerous?" asked Sergeant Murphy, the team leader. "I don't think so," Dr. Webb said. "At least not immediately. But look at this." She showed them the scanner display. "The readings suggest this creature is far more complex than its size would indicate. The neural activity alone is comparable to a human child." David studied the small dragon. "So it's smart, very smart. And there's something else." Dr. Webb adjusted her scanner and pointed it at the ground beneath the creature. "I'm picking up seismic activity. Something large is moving underground." Multiple somethings. The soldiers all looked at each other. "How large?" Sergeant Murphy asked. "Large enough to level this colony if they wanted to." That got everyone's attention. David watched the creature more carefully. "You think this little guy is connected to whatever's down there?" "The energy signatures match. I think this creature might be some kind of scout or messenger." "So what do we do?" David asked. Dr. Webb packed up her equipment. "We watch and wait. And we hope it's friendly." The research team left, but David was ordered to maintain his patrol with extra attention to the creature. As the hours passed, he found himself checking on it more and more often. The creature never moved from its spot. It didn't eat or drink or show any signs of needing rest. It just sat there watching. By evening, half the colony had heard about the dragon. People came to the fence to stare at it, but the creature ignored them all. It only seemed interested in David. Every time he walked by on patrol, those amber eyes would track him until he was out of sight. "It likes you," said Private Wilson during the shift change. "Don't be stupid," David replied. "It's an alien. It doesn't like or dislike anything." But as David walked away, he could feel those eyes following him, and deep underground the seismic monitors registered movement. Something vast and powerful was stirring in response to the small creature's presence. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the creature's eyes. There had been something in them that bothered him. Not hostility or hunger, but something else. Something that reminded him of his own reflection in the mirror on bad days. The creature looked lonely. David told himself he was being ridiculous. You couldn't read emotions in an alien's face. But the thought stuck with him as he tossed and turned in his narrow bunk. Outside, the 3 moons set one by one, and in the darkness between the stars, something waited for a signal that only a small dragon and a human soldier could provide. When dawn came to New Terra, the creature was still there, still watching, still waiting, and David Mills was about to make a choice that would change the fate of 2 species forever. 5 days had passed since the dragon hatchling first appeared at the colony's edge. David Mills sat on an overturned supply crate, cleaning his rifle while keeping one eye on the creature. The little dragon hadn't moved more than a few feet from its original position, and the whole situation was starting to make everyone nervous. Colony Administrator Helen Park paced back and forth in the command center, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "I don't care what your scans say, Doctor. That thing has been sitting out there for almost a week. It's not natural." David could hear Dr. Webb's calm response. The creature shows no signs of aggression. In fact, it appears to be exhibiting classic waiting behavior. Many species use patience as a survival strategy. Waiting for what? Administrator Park snapped. An invasion? You said yourself there are massive heat signatures moving around underground. What if this is just the advanced scout? David glanced at the dragon. As if sensing his attention, the creature turned its head and looked directly at him. The scales along its neck shifted from deep blue to a lighter shade, almost silver. David had started noticing these color changes over the past few days. "They seem to happen more often when he was around, sir." Private Wilson approached with the daily patrol assignment. "Command wants you to extend your rounds to include the eastern perimeter. They're worried about more of those things showing up." David nodded and shouldered his rifle. As he walked toward the fence line, he noticed the dragon's posture change slightly. It sat up straighter, and those amber eyes tracked his movement with what David could only describe as interest. On impulse, David stopped about 10 feet from the creature. "Hello there, little guy." The dragon's scales rippled with color, shifting from blue to gold and back again. It tilted its head like a curious bird. "You understand me, don't you?" David said quietly. "I don't know how, but you do." Behind him, several colonists had gathered to watch. David could hear their whispered comments about him talking to the alien, but he ignored them. Something about the creature's expression made him want to keep talking. "I know what it's like to wait," David continued. "I've done my share of it. Military life is mostly waiting. Waiting for orders, waiting for transport, waiting for something to happen." He paused. "But you're not waiting for orders, are you? You're waiting for something else." The dragon's wings twitched slightly. The movement was so small David almost missed it, but it was the first voluntary motion the creature had made since arriving. Dr. Webb appeared at David's shoulder with her scanner. "Corporal, the creature's bioreadings just spiked. Neural activity, heart rate, even the electrical field around it. Whatever you just said, it had an effect." David looked at the scanner display. Even to his untrained eye, the difference was obvious. "It's responding to conversation." "It would appear so, but why you specifically?" "It's ignored everyone else who's tried to communicate with it." That was a good question. David had been wondering the same thing himself. "Maybe it's not about what I'm saying. Maybe it's about how I'm saying it." Dr. Webb raised an eyebrow. "Explain," David thought for a moment. "Everyone else who's tried talking to it has been trying to get information, asking questions, making demands." "I'm just talking, like you would to a friend. You think it responds to emotional tone rather than language?" "I think it responds to intention." David looked at the dragon again. "You're not just smart, are you? You're empathic. You can feel what people are feeling when they talk to you." The dragon's scales shifted to a warm gold color, and for the first time since its arrival, it made a sound, a soft musical trill that seemed to express approval. Dr. Webb's scanner went crazy. "Corporal, I need you to keep talking to it. These readings are unlike anything I've seen." David knelt down, bringing himself closer to the dragon's eye level. "Most people here are scared of you. They think you're dangerous because you're different. But I don't think you want to hurt anyone. I think you want something else entirely." The dragon's tail uncurled slightly, and it took a small step toward David. The movement caused a stir among the watching colonists. "Stay back," Sergeant Murphy called out. "Don't let it get too close." David held up a hand without taking his eyes off the dragon. "It's okay. It's not aggressive." The creature stopped just out of arm's reach and sat down again. But now it was facing David directly instead of watching the colony. The change in posture was subtle but significant. "You want to show me something," David said. It wasn't a question. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You're not waiting for something to come to you. You're waiting for someone to follow you somewhere." The dragon's scales blazed with golden light for a moment, then settled into a steady, warm amber that matched its eyes. It stood up and took several steps away from the colony, then looked back at David expectantly. Dr. Webb grabbed David's arm. "Corporal, you need to see this." She showed him the scanner display. The underground activity just intensified dramatically. Whatever's down there is responding to the creature's emotional state. David could feel the ground vibrating slightly under his feet. In the distance, small rocks were rolling down hillsides as something massive moved through the planet's crust. "It's trying to lead me somewhere," David said, "and whatever's underground is waiting to see if I'll follow." "Absolutely not," Sergeant Murphy interrupted. "You're not going anywhere with that thing. It could be leading you into a trap." David looked at the dragon, which had returned to its original position, but was now watching him with obvious expectation. What if it's not a trap? What if it's an invitation? An invitation to what? To meet its family. That night, David couldn't stop thinking about the dragon's behavior. He'd studied animal psychology as part of his military training, and everything about the creature's actions suggested complex social intelligence. It wasn't just smart. It was trying to bridge a gap between two species that couldn't communicate through normal means. The seismic activity continued throughout the night, with whatever was underground, maintaining a careful distance from the colony. It was as if they were waiting for some kind of signal, a sign that humans could be trusted. David made his decision before dawn. He gathered his gear and wrote a short message for Dr. Webb explaining his intentions. Then he walked out to where the dragon waited in the pre-dawn darkness. "Okay, little friend," he said quietly. "If you want to show me something, I'm ready to see it." The dragon's scales lit up like a beacon in the darkness, and for the first time in 6 days it began to move. Not away from David, but toward him, brushing against his leg with surprising warmth before heading into the unknown landscape of New Terra. David took a deep breath and followed, knowing that with each step, he was walking further from everything familiar and deeper into a mystery that would define humanity's future among the stars. The supply ship's engines roared overhead as it lifted off from New Terra's landing pad, carrying monthly reports back to Earth Command. David Mills watched from his guard post as the vessel climbed through the purple atmosphere, its running lights growing smaller until they disappeared among the stars. Near the colony fence, the dragon hatchling suddenly raised its head and let out a sound David had never heard before. It was a low, mournful call that seemed to carry across the entire settlement. The creature's scales, which had been a calm blue-green all morning, shifted to deep indigo shot through with silver streaks. David set down his equipment and walked over to the fence. "Hey there, little guy. What's wrong?" The dragon turned those amber eyes toward him, and David could swear he saw sadness in them. The creature's wings, usually folded neatly against its back, drooped like those of a dejected bird. Dr. Webb jogged over from the research station, scanner in hand. "Did you hear that sound?" The acoustic pattern was incredibly complex, almost like— She paused, studying her readings, like a distress call. "Distress from what?" David asked, and I'm not sure. But the timing is interesting. The creature only made that sound when the supply ship was leaving. David watched the dragon, which had returned to its usual position but maintained those sad, dark colors. Maybe it doesn't like being left behind. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Doc. Every time someone leaves the colony, this little guy has to stay here, alone. Maybe it's trying to tell us something about loneliness." Dr. Webb's scanner beeped as she took new readings. "The creature's stress hormones are elevated. Heart rate increased. You might be onto something, Corporal." David knelt down near the fence, as close to the dragon as the barrier would allow. "Is that it? Are you lonely out here?" The dragon's scales shifted slightly, the dark colors lightening to a deep purple. It stood up and walked to the fence, pressing its small body against the metal mesh that separated them. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Webb whispered. It's responding to emotional context again. David reached through the fence and gently touched the creature's scaled snout. The dragon leaned into the contact and its scales began to warm to a soft golden color. The change was gradual but unmistakable. "You do understand, don't you?" David said softly. "You know what it feels like to be the only one of your kind in a place." Behind them, Administrator Park's voice carried across the compound. "I don't care what the research data says. That thing has been here for over a week with no explanation. I want it removed." "Removed how?" Dr. Webb called back. "It's not harming anyone. It's a security risk. Those underground movements are getting stronger every day. What if this is all some kind of elaborate trap?" David felt the dragon tense under his touch. The creature's scales darkened again and it backed away from the fence. "Wait," David said, standing up. "Look at how it reacts to hostility versus kindness. This isn't a scout or a weapon. It's a child." "A child?" Administrator Park strode over, her face red with frustration. "Corporal, that's an alien entity of unknown capabilities. We can't afford to anthropomorphize it." "I'm not anthropomorphizing anything. I'm observing behavior patterns." David gestured toward the dragon, which had retreated to its original spot, but was still watching the conversation. "It responds to tone, emotion, and social cues. It shows stress when separated from others and comfort when offered gentle contact. Those are universal signs of social intelligence," Dr. Webb nodded. "The biological data supports that interpretation. This creature's neural patterns suggest high emotional intelligence and strong social needs." "Then why hasn't it tried to return to its own kind?" Administrator Park demanded. David looked at the dragon thoughtfully. "Because it can't, at least not alone." He walked away from the group and sat down in the dirt about 20 feet from the creature. The dragon immediately perked up, its scales brightening slightly. "You're not lost, are you?" David said conversationally. "You know exactly where you belong. But you can't go there by yourself. You need someone to come with you." The dragon stood up and took several steps toward the hills beyond the colony. Then it stopped and looked back at David, its entire body language expressing expectation. "That's it, isn't it? You want me to follow you home?" The creature's scales blazed with golden light and it let out a series of musical trills that sounded like excitement. It took a few more steps toward the hills, then returned to David's side, nuzzling against his leg. Dr. Webb's scanner was going wild. "Corporal, the creature's emotional state just peaked. Whatever you said, you hit the mark exactly." "Underground," something responded. The seismic monitors registered massive movement converging on a point roughly 50 kilometers from the colony. Whatever was down there had heard the dragon's call and was moving to answer it. "Absolutely not," Administrator Park said firmly. "I forbid any colony personnel from leaving the settlement to follow that creature." "It's too dangerous." David stood up, his mind racing. The dragon looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes and he could see the hope in them. Hope that someone finally understood what it was trying to communicate. "Ma'am, with respect, I think this is bigger than colony safety protocols. This creature isn't just asking for help. It's offering us something. A chance to meet its people on peaceful terms. And if you're wrong? If this is all an elaborate trap?" David looked at the dragon, which was watching the conversation with obvious anxiety. Its scales had started to fade back toward blue. "Then I guess we'll find out. But if I'm right and we refuse this invitation, we might be throwing away humanity's best chance at making real contact with another intelligent species." The dragon moved closer to David and gently gripped the bottom of his pants with its teeth, not biting, just holding on. Like a child asking to be taken home, Dr. Webb lowered her scanner. "Administrator, the seismic data suggests whatever's underground isn't approaching the colony. They're maintaining a safe distance. That's not the behavior of an invasion force. It's the behavior of parents waiting for their child to come home," David added quietly. Administrator Park looked from David to the dragon to the readouts on Dr. Webb's equipment. "This is insane. I can't authorize a mission based on emotional speculation about alien psychology." "Then don't authorize it," David said. "I'll go on my own time. Off duty. Corporal Mills, if you leave this colony without permission, you'll be court-martialed." David looked down at the small dragon, which was still holding onto his pants and watching him with those impossibly expressive eyes. In them he saw not just hope but trust. The creature believed he would help, even when his own species was too afraid to take the chance. "Some things are more important than military protocol, ma'am. This little guy has been waiting here for over a week. trying to show us that his people want to talk. The least we can do is listen. The dragon's scales shifted to the warmest gold David had ever seen, and it released his pants to press against his leg in what could only be described as a hug. Underground, the massive shape stopped moving and waited. Above ground, a human soldier prepared to make a choice that would echo across the galaxy. The sun was setting over New Terra, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the growing darkness, David could see the dragon's scales glowing softly with their own light. It was beautiful, alien, and completely trusting. "Okay, little friend," David whispered. "Let's go meet your family." The alien grass crunched under David Mills's boots as he followed the dragon hatchling across New Terra's unexplored wilderness. They had been walking for 6 hours, leaving the human colony far behind them. The 3 moons provided enough light to see by, but the landscape was still strange and intimidating. The dragon moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to wait for David to catch up. Whenever he fell too far behind, the creature would turn back and brush against his leg as if to encourage him to keep going. Its scales had settled into a steady pattern of silver and blue that David was learning to associate with determination, mixed with concern. David's water bottle was nearly empty, and his legs ached from walking on the uneven terrain. The hatchling seemed to sense his fatigue because it led him to a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter. "Time for a break?" David asked, settling down on a flat stone. The dragon curled up next to him, its warm body providing unexpected comfort in the cool night air. David pulled out his emergency rations and ate in silence, sharing small pieces with the creature. The dragon sniffed each offering carefully before eating, its scales brightening to a pleased golden color when it found something it liked. While they rested, David studied his companion more carefully. The creature's movements were graceful and deliberate, never wasted or random. Its eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, not with fear but with the awareness of someone traveling through familiar territory. "You've made this trip before, haven't you?" David said. "This isn't the first time you've tried to bring someone home." The dragon's scales shifted to a darker blue, and it made a soft sound that reminded David of a sigh. "But the others didn't follow you." "The other humans, I mean. They were too scared." The creature pressed closer to David, seeking comfort. Its scales showed patterns of deep blue mixed with silver streaks that David had come to recognize as sadness. "Well, I'm here now," David said, gently stroking the dragon's neck. "And I'm not going anywhere." The scales immediately brightened to warm gold, and the dragon made a musical trill that sounded like contentment. They resumed walking as the largest moon reached its peak overhead. The dragon led David along paths that weren't quite paths, following routes through the landscape that seemed to flow naturally around obstacles. They crossed streams on fallen logs that appeared to have been positioned deliberately, and climbed hills using switchbacks that made the ascent easier than it should have been. "Your people shaped this land, didn't they?" David observed. "Not with machines, but with time and patience." The dragon looked back at him with what David could swear was approval. Its scales showed flickers of bright gold mixed with the steady blue of concentration. As they walked, David began to notice patterns in the dragon's color changes. Deep blue for sadness or worry, silver for determination, gold for happiness or approval. There were other colors too, subtle shades that seemed to indicate more complex emotions. It was like watching a living mood ring, but infinitely more sophisticated. "You're trying to teach me your language, aren't you?" David said during another rest stop. "The colors, the sounds, it's all communication." The dragon's entire body lit up with swirling patterns of gold and silver. It made a series of complex musical sounds, then touched David's hand with its snout. When it pulled away, David felt a strange tingling sensation, as if electricity had passed between them. For just a moment, David thought he could almost understand what the dragon was trying to say. Not words, but feelings and concepts that flowed directly into his mind. Images of vast underground chambers filled with creatures like the hatchling, but much larger. A sense of ancient wisdom and terrible loneliness. The need to connect with others to share the burden of existence. "Your people are empaths," David said softly. "You don't just read emotions, you share them." The dragon nodded, a surprisingly human gesture that confirmed David's growing suspicion that the creature understood much more than it could express. They encountered their first real challenge when they reached a wide river that cut across their path. The water moved fast and looked deep, Definitely too dangerous for David to cross on foot. The dragon studied the water for a long moment, its scales cycling through several colors as it considered options. Finally, the creature made a decision. It moved to a section of riverbank where large stones created a series of stepping points across the water. But the stones were too far apart for David to jump safely. The dragon looked at David, then at the stones, then back at David. Its scales shifted to a pattern David hadn't seen before. Deep gold with streaks of red that seemed to pulse with urgency. "You want me to trust you," David said, understanding. "You're going to help me across somehow." The dragon moved to the first stone and looked back expectantly. David joined it at the water's edge, still uncertain how this was going to work. The creature placed one small clawed foot on David's boot and looked up at him. Slowly, carefully, it began to spread its wings. They were larger than David had realized, easily spanning 6 feet when fully extended. More importantly, they seemed to generate some kind of energy field that made the air around them shimmer. "You can fly," David said in amazement. The dragon made a sound that might have been laughter, then launched itself into the air. It hovered next to David, wings beating steadily, and extended one clawed foot toward him. David understood. He gripped the dragon's offered foot and immediately felt the same tingling sensation he'd experienced earlier. But this time it was stronger, and he could feel the creature's power flowing into him. His body became lighter, not weightless but significantly easier to move. Together they made their way across the river, the dragon providing just enough lift to let David leap safely from stone to stone. When they reached the other side, David was amazed to realize he wasn't even breathing hard. "That was incredible," he said, as the dragon settled on the ground beside him. "Your people don't just communicate through emotion. You can share physical abilities too." The dragon's scales showed the warm gold of pride mixed with something else, a deep red that David was beginning to associate with affection or bonding. They walked through the rest of the night and into the early morning, covering ground faster than David would have thought possible. The dragon seemed to be sharing its endurance with him, keeping him fresh and alert despite the long trek. As the sun rose over New Terra, David could see their destination in the distance. A series of low hills that looked ordinary from the outside, but which the dragon approached with obvious excitement. Its scales were practically blazing with golden light. "We're almost there," David said, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The dragon pressed against his leg one more time, then began to move faster. They were going to meet the creature's family, and David had no idea what to expect. But as they approached the hills, he could feel the ground vibrating slightly under his feet. Something vast was stirring beneath the surface of New Terra. The dragon stopped at what looked like a simple cave entrance and turned to David with those expressive amber eyes. Its scales showed a complex pattern of colors that David interpreted as gratitude, hope, and deep trust. "Thank you for bringing me home," the pattern seemed to say. "Now let me show you wonders beyond your imagination." David took a deep breath and followed the small dragon into the darkness, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The cave entrance looked ordinary enough, just a dark opening in the hillside surrounded by purple flowering vines. But as David Mills followed the dragon hatchling inside, he realized this was no natural formation. The walls curved in smooth, organic patterns that seemed to flow like frozen water. Soft blue light emanated from veins in the rock itself, providing just enough illumination to see by. The dragon's scales shifted to bright gold as they moved deeper into the tunnel. The creature was practically glowing with excitement, occasionally stopping to look back at David with those expressive amber eyes. Each time their gazes met, David felt that strange tingling sensation, as if the dragon was sharing its emotions directly with him. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, winding deeper into New Terra's crust. The blue light grew stronger as they descended, and David began to hear something that made his skin crawl. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones, like the planet itself was humming. "What is that?" David whispered. The dragon made a soft musical sound that seemed to harmonize with the vibration. As it did, the lights in the walls pulsed brighter, and David realized what he was hearing. It was communication. The entire cave system was alive with some kind of organic technology that carried messages through resonance and light. They emerged from the tunnel into a chamber so vast that David couldn't see the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, supported by flowing columns that looked more grown than built. Everything glowed with that same soft blue light, but here it was accompanied by other colors. Streams of green and gold and silver flowed through channels in the walls like luminous rivers, but it was the chamber's inhabitants that made David's breath catch in his throat. Dragons. Dozens of them, ranging in size from creatures as large as elephants down to hatchlings no bigger than the one that had led him here. They moved through the space with fluid grace, their scales catching and reflecting the colored lights until the entire cavern shimmered, like the inside of a jewel. The dragon beside David called out, a complex series of musical notes that echoed through the chamber. Every head turned toward them, and David found himself the focus of dozens of alien gazes. For a moment, he felt like prey surrounded by predators. Then the largest dragon approached them, and David's fear transformed into awe. The creature was magnificent, easily 30 feet from nose to tail, with scales that shifted through every color David had ever seen and several he was sure he hadn't. Its eyes were the same amber as the hatchlings, but ancient beyond measure. When it looked at David, he felt as if his soul was being gently examined. The great dragon lowered its massive head until it was level with David's chest. The hatchling moved between them and began a rapid sequence of color changes, its scales flashing through patterns too fast for David to follow. It was clearly explaining something, telling the story of their journey. When the hatchling finished, the large dragon studied David for a long moment. Then it did something David never expected. It smiled. Not a human smile, but unmistakably an expression of welcome and approval. The dragon's scales shifted to warm gold, and it made a sound like distant thunder that somehow conveyed deep satisfaction. Other dragons began to approach, moving slowly so as not to startle David. They came in all sizes and color patterns, some with wings, others purely terrestrial. All of them radiated intelligence and curiosity as they examined the human who had followed their young one home. The hatchling pressed against David's leg and looked up at him expectantly. Its scales showed a mixture of pride and hope that needed no translation. "You want me to try to communicate with them," David said. The hatchlings' scales blazed with golden approval. David looked around at the assembled dragons, feeling the weight of the moment. This was first contact between humanity and an alien intelligence, and it was happening in a cave deep beneath New Terra's surface with only him as humanity's representative. He took a deep breath and stepped forward toward the great dragon. "My name is David Mills. I come from the human settlement on the surface. Your young one brought me here." The dragon's eyes widened slightly, and its scales shifted through a complex pattern of colors. It opened its mouth and spoke, not in words but in harmonics that David felt as much as heard. The sound washed over him like music, carrying emotions and concepts that bypassed his ears and went straight to his mind. "Welcome, small brave one. We are the Drakhmori, gardeners of thought and shepherds of growing minds. Your kind shows promise, but we had begun to fear you were too young, too fearful to accept what we offer." David staggered as the meaning flooded into his consciousness. "You can speak directly to my mind. When one is willing to listen with more than ears, yes. Your young friend has told us of your kindness, your willingness to trust despite fear. These are the qualities we seek in those who would join the greater community." The greater community? Images flowed into David's mind. Worlds beyond counting, each home to species that had learned to share thoughts and emotions across the void between stars. A network of consciousness that spanned the galaxy, united not by technology but by empathy and understanding. We are old, young human. We have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. Most destroy themselves before they learn the secret of true communication. But some, the rare few, prove capable of growth beyond their physical limitations. David looked around the cavern with new understanding. "You're testing us. Humanity, I mean. This whole situation was a test. Your young friend volunteered for this task. Alone among our children, she believed your species might be ready. She waited at your settlement for many cycles, hoping one of you would show the courage to follow her home." The hatchling pressed closer to David, its scales showing patterns of deep affection. The great dragon continued its explanation. "We do not force contact upon unwilling minds. Those who would join us must choose to do so freely, with full understanding of what such a choice means. You have passed the first test by showing trust and compassion to one very different from yourself. "What's the second test?" David asked, though he suspected he already knew. "You must choose. Return to your people and tell them what you have seen, knowing they may not believe, or remain here and learn our ways, becoming a bridge between our kinds. Either choice has value, but both carry great responsibility." David felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The dragons waited patiently while he processed what he'd learned. Around him, the cavern hummed with quiet conversation and harmonics he was beginning to understand. "What happens if I go back and my people reject your offer? Then we wait. As we have waited for others who were not yet ready, perhaps in another generation or another century, humanity will produce someone else willing to take this step. And if I stay, you become something new, not human, not Draori, but a fusion of both. You would live as long as we do, think as we think, but carry within yourself the unique perspective of your species. You would be our gift to humanity and humanity's gift to us." David looked at the hatchling, who was watching him with obvious anxiety. Her scales showed swirling patterns of hope and fear, love and uncertainty. "She cares about me," David said, finally understanding the depth of the connection they'd formed. "She has chosen you as bondmate. A relationship we reserve for those we trust completely. It is a great honor and a great responsibility. Her fate is now tied to yours, whatever you decide." David knelt down and gently stroked the hatchling's neck. She leaned into his touch, purring with contentment. "I can't abandon her," David said quietly. "And I can't abandon my own species either." The great dragon's scales shifted to a pattern David interpreted as approval. "Then you understand the true test. It was never about choosing between your people and ours. It was about finding a way to bring them together." Around the cavern, the other dragons began to hum in harmony, their scales creating patterns of light that danced across the walls. David felt their approval washing over him like warm sunlight. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now, young bridge builder, you learn. And when you are ready, you return to your people with an offer that will change both our species forever." 3 weeks had passed since David Mills first descended into the Draori caverns, and the world above had changed dramatically. The human colony buzzed with activity as engineers and scientists worked alongside dragon technicians to establish the first interspecies research facility in human history. David stood on the newly constructed observation platform, watching children from the colony play with young dragons in the gardens below. The sight still amazed him. Human toddlers chasing hatchlings through flower beds that glowed with their own inner light, while their parents chatted with adult Draori using translation devices that converted thought into sound. The hatchling who had started it all, now grown to the size of a large dog, lounged next to David in the warm afternoon sun. Her scales had settled into a permanent pattern of gold and silver that the Draori elders said indicated deep contentment and strong bonding. She wore a small device around her neck that allowed her to speak directly to humans without the need for physical contact. "The delegation from Earth Command arrives tomorrow," she said, her voice a pleasant harmonic that felt like music in David's mind. "Are you nervous?" David smiled and scratched behind her neck ridges, a gesture that made her purr with pleasure. "Terrified," he admitted. "It's one thing to convince a small colony to trust you. It's another to represent 2 species to the entire human government." Dr. Webb approached carrying a data pad and wearing the expression of someone who'd been living on coffee and excitement for weeks. "David, the final preparations are complete. The packed chamber is ready for tomorrow's ceremony." David nodded and followed her down into the hillside, through passages that had been carved to accommodate both human and dragon physiology. The packed chamber was the result of 3 weeks of intense collaboration between human engineers and Draori shapers. The room itself was a perfect fusion of technologies, with walls that curved organically but contained human-built monitoring equipment. At the chamber's center stood the pack stone, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly perceive. It pulsed with soft light that responded to the emotions of those nearby, growing brighter when people felt hope or joy, dimming when they experienced fear or doubt. "The Draori delegation is already here," Dr. Webb said, gesturing to the far side of the chamber where 3 of the great dragons waited in patient silence. "And the human representatives will arrive with the Earth Command ship tomorrow morning." David studied the packed stone with a mixture of awe and responsibility. According to the Draori elders, The crystal would record the agreement between their species in patterns of light and energy that would exist for millions of years. It was more than a treaty. It was a joining of destinies that would affect every human in Draori yet to be born. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. Representatives from both species placed their hands or claws on the pact stone while stating their intentions for the future. The crystal would read their true feelings and encode them permanently, creating a bond that could never be broken by politics or time. Admiral Sarah Chen, the head of the Earth Command delegation, was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had arrived with a full diplomatic team and enough firepower to level half the continent, but she approached the pact chamber with genuine curiosity rather than fear. "So this is the famous pact stone," she said, studying the crystal structure. "And you're certain it will actually record our agreement?" Elder Velnath, the ancient Draori who served as their chief diplomat, nodded his massive head. His scales were pure silver with age, and his voice carried the weight of millennia. "The stone has recorded 17 previous pacts between species across the galaxy. None have ever been broken. What exactly are we agreeing to?" Admiral Chen asked. David stepped forward, his role as translator and bridge between species making him the natural spokesman. Mutual protection, shared knowledge, and joint exploration of the galaxy. Humanity gains access to Draori technology and their network of allied species. In return, we help them establish new colonies and defend their existing ones. And the costs? No interstellar wars without unanimous consent from all allied species. No genocide, no slavery, no exploitation of pre-spaceflight civilizations. And humans who choose to bond with Draori become something new. Citizens of both species. Admiral Chen looked at David with understanding. "Like you have." David nodded. The process had been gradual and painless, but irreversible. His lifespan was now measured in millennia rather than decades. His mind expanded to encompass thoughts and emotions no baseline human could experience. He was still himself, but more than himself. A bridge between two very different ways of existing. "The choice is voluntary," Elder Velnath added. "No human will be forced to undergo the transformation. But those who do will serve as ambassadors and guides for both our peoples." The hatchling, now called Luna by the human children, pressed against David's leg. "Show them," she said quietly. "Show them what we've built together." David activated the chamber's display system, filling the air with holographic images of the past 3 weeks. Human and Draori children playing together, scientists from both species working on projects that neither could have completed alone. Art that combined human creativity with Draori harmony, creating beauty beyond what either species could achieve separately. "This is what we're really agreeing to," David said. "Not just an alliance, but a new kind of existence. 2 species becoming one people." Admiral Chen studied the images for a long time. Finally, she turned to her team of advisors and diplomats. "Recommendations? The technology sharing alone would advance human civilization by centuries," said the chief scientist. "Their medical knowledge could eliminate most diseases. Their engineering could solve the energy crisis. The military implications are staggering," added the defense advisor. "Their allies control shipping lanes across half the galaxy. We'd never have to worry about resource shortages or territorial disputes again." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "And the risks? Cultural contamination, loss of human identity, dependency on alien technology." The sociologist's concerns were valid, but her voice lacked conviction. "Those are risks we can manage," Admiral Chen decided. "This opportunity is too valuable to pass up." She approached the pact stone and placed her palm against its surface. "On behalf of the United Earth Government, I accept the terms of this alliance." The crystal flared with brilliant light as it read her intentions. David felt the hatchling's joy through their bond, a wave of pure happiness that made his eyes water. Elder Velnath placed one massive claw on the stone. "On behalf of the Draori Collective and our 47 allied species, we welcome humanity to the greater community." The light from the pact stone intensified until it filled the entire chamber. David felt something fundamental shift in the universe, as if a door that had been closed for all of human history had suddenly opened. "It is done," Elder Velnath said with satisfaction. "The galaxy has gained a new guardian species." Over the following months, the changes were rapid and profound. Human colonies spread across a dozen star systems with Draori guidance and protection. Earth itself was transformed as alien technology cleaned the oceans and restored the atmosphere. Disease became a historical curiosity as Draori medical knowledge eliminated suffering on a scale never before imagined. But the greatest change was in humanity itself. Thousands of volunteers underwent the bonding process, becoming living bridges between species. They carried human ambition and creativity into the galactic community while bringing alien wisdom and perspective back to Earth. David and Luna became the first formal ambassadors of the joint species, traveling between worlds to establish new colonies and contact other species. Their bond had become a template for cooperation that inspired millions. Standing on the observation deck of their ship as it approached a new world, David watched Luna's scales shift through patterns of excitement and anticipation. They were no longer human and dragon, but something entirely new, something that could exist in the space between species and help them find common ground. "What do you think we'll find here?" Luna asked, her mental voice warm with affection and curiosity. David smiled and looked out at the alien stars. "Another chance to prove that different doesn't mean enemy. Another opportunity to show that the galaxy is big enough for all of us." The ship descended toward the planet's surface, carrying the promise of friendship and the hope of unity to yet another corner of the cosmos. Behind them, the stars themselves seemed to pulse with approval, as if the universe had been waiting for this moment when two species became one people, ready to face whatever wonders and challenges lay ahead among the infinite possibilities of space.